lot to discuss indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome you here. Please find your seats. There's free seats available because we want to keep to the time frame we set ourselves. We want to have enough time for our discussions, and I look forward to your attention. Please find your seats.
Wunderbar, herzlichen Dank.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome. A warm welcome to the Weltsaal of the Federal Foreign Office. A warm welcome to all of you here, but a warm welcome also to you online in the live streams. Representatives of the press, I'd like to also welcome you most cordially to the briefing on the COP entitled 10 Years Paris Agreement, Where Do We Stand When It Comes to Climate Protection? We all know next week the 30th COP conference will begin in Brazil, in Belém, and until then, the countries will have to submit in writing just how much better they want to become when it comes to climate protection. And in today's briefing, we're going to address pivotal questions. We're dealing with these questions in the next weeks, but also this afternoon. Where do we stand? What's at stake in Berlin? And what role does Germany want to assume? What about the national climate plans, the NDCs? What about mitigation, adaptation? And what about climate financing, including the well-known Baku to Berlin road map in times of geopolitical tensions? Please come in. Please feel free to find seating. Some of you attended the workshops this morning addressing the key topics of COP30, also when it comes to the implementation of the global stocktake, the Berlin work program, the climate financing, and you had also attended a workshop on climate science. What's next for climate science? A couple of topics we'll address this afternoon. My name is Katie Gallis. I'm your facilitator and moderator. We have two languages, German, channel 1, for those who require interpretation into German, and English will be available on channel 2. You will have headphones and devices, and I would like to invite all of you to ask questions via Slido. It's not a one-way street. We want to head into both directions. I'd like to invite you, send me your questions to my iPad, and I will pose these questions to our panelists. Let's begin with this year's COP briefing. Well, I think everyone has found their seats. I would like to pass for the official welcome to Dr. Susanne Dröge, the head of the Deutsche Klimakonsortium, Sabine Nallinger, the Foundation Climate Economy, and the CEO of the German Klimakonsortium, the German Climate Consortium. A warm welcome to you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Gallus. Also on behalf of the Deutsche Klimakonsortium, I'm represented on the board. A warm welcome to today's briefing. I'm happy to see so many of you here. We've had this briefing for 15 years now, and it always serves to provide impetus from climate science and draw your attention what should be on the agenda. 28 universities and extra academic research institutes are represented there. It was very natural sciences based, but social sciences now also are part of our consortium, and I think in times like these it's more than necessary and important. We provide and gather reliable facts and information, and we feed it into the German political debate, the German public debate. letters to the chancellors are necessary from time to time, and many of you know that there is a special summit in Brussels of the Environmental Council. So this year, we're all anxious to find out what's happening next. And the CEO, Mrs. Oels, sends her greetings. She's already on her way to Berlin. You mentioned the workshops. Allow me to also briefly address these. The global situation is dire indeed, the overall situation. We all know it's important that we do, but climate policies are under attack, and the workshop I attended dealt with the role of climate sciences and the fact that the data, that the United States are moving away, and the data is something that causes great headaches. And I think this is something that we need to discuss here, the role of climate sciences. I will pass the floor to Sabine Nallinger, the Foundation Climate and Economy. It's the third time that we're hosting this event together, and Sabine, over to you. Thank you very much, Susanne. Also, the Foundation Klimawirtschaft, Climate and Economy, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome. Many representatives of the industry, business community are represented here and are engaging in a discussion with you, the academic and the science community. It's a special COP indeed, because it marks the 10th anniversary since Paris. 10 years ago, we celebrated the breakthrough for climate protection. We set ourselves an objective. I think you're all familiar with this objective, but nonetheless, maybe you feel good when saying this clearly. We want to be clearly below the threshold of 2 degrees and possibly not reach 1.5 degrees warming. And 195 countries continue to stand by this agreed upon goal. The COP set the framework, and Paris obliges us all. I remember Paris well. My foundation and the CEOs and the Federal Minister for the Environment traveled to Paris via train, and in Cologne, our train was stopped. Protesters enabled our train to continue, and protests back then there was criticism that the business community would go to Berlin. People couldn't fathom that the business community would participate. It was seen as a problem. But the good news is that broad parts of the industry are participating. We will have a panel where we have companies present introducing solutions, so that we can say that, yes, indeed, the business community is part of the problem-solving community. The companies have developed strategies to become carbon neutral. They adapted and aligned their investments accordingly. And the companies started to initiate processes, use renewable energies, processes pertaining to the circular economy, but also processes in efficiency. But the COP is the driving force. Business is international. We need international agreements. COP provides international agreements that provide the guardrails, the guiding principles for our global markets. And especially when I look at our companies, steel, cement, chemical companies, and they tell us that national or European agreements don't suffice. We will only be carbon neutral if we work on this globally and internationally, and this is why it is so important. Today, we have to take note of the fact that we are on a good path to move beyond 2%. We're not on the path we wanted to be on. And this is why it's especially important, especially after the departure of the United States, to forge new alliances, that we create look for new alliances, the Club of Emission Traders, and a couple of other deliberations. In conclusion, I'd like to make two important remarks. Two comments. For one, we need to look for partnerships, to pioneering alliances that show the way, and that we strengthen old existing alliances. And a second point that is very important to me, let us not punish the pioneers. The term first mover disadvantage is spreading around the business community, and the companies are worried that those who pioneered and advanced are being punished because they moved ahead. And this is why it is important that we provide predictability in Berlin, and that we discuss implementation in Berlin. I'm optimistic when it comes to COP. Many representatives from the business community will be present. We from the Stiftung Klimawirtschaft continue to work with the business community to keep the world moving, to bring about a climate neutral world. When I look at the federal government, the chancellor will travel to the COP, but also we see a continuity in terms of climate foreign policy, and this is very encouraging indeed, and I look forward to the discussions, and I look forward to a good COP in Berlin. Thank you very much. Well, allow me to also welcome you most cordially as German climate consortium. We've been on board for a long time. I looked at the history of these COP briefings, and I'd like to highlight three peculiarities. First, we never had a COP briefing that took place in parallel to such an important political event, the special summit of the EU Ministers for the Environment in Brussels. That is the reason, my colleague mentioned it, that Minister Schneider could not be here in person, but he will give his keynote via video. It was important to him. So this summit in Brussels in parallel, I think many are following what's happening in Brussels, and we all hope that they will succeed in passing an ambitious climate goal with corresponding measures that also are reflected in the NDCs, and that the measures agreed upon will not be touched in Brussels. Secondly, I think we never had it before that we had three ministers from three federal ministries present. It's a great honor for us to welcome three ministers of the federal government, but I also interpret it as a sign that in times where climate policies are under attack from various fronts, that the federal government sends out a clear signal that ambitious climate policy is important to the government. And the third peculiarity is the following. We've never had a COP briefing so close to the COP meeting. Many of the speakers are already on the way to Berlin. The local leaders summit is taking place. Heike Henn, head of department, who will be part of the panel, is going to rush to the airport, and I think many of you are ready to travel to Berlin. So we're happy that despite of all, you managed to come here, and we wish all of us productive and fruitful afternoon and great discussions. Thank you very much. To all of you, one question to you, Tim, and we heard the overall political situation is rough and stormy, but talk about climate protection in society. Take us on board in social sciences. We have a tendency that climate change is being put into question, not just in the United States, but we have published a paper with facts on climate change that gathers information on climate change, and this contains a remarkable thesis in Nature Climate Sciences. It was published just recently, a survey among 130,000 people in 125 countries, representative for more than 90% of the global population, and 90% say that governments should do more for climate protection. So a clear majority of the global population is in favor of climate protection. And I think this is good news in times where we listen or hear the voices of those who are loud. Thank you very much, and all the best for this COP briefing this afternoon. Thank you so much. Well, we're still waiting for the ministers. I have a surprise Slido for you. We're going to practice this now, so you don't have excuses, and so you know for sure what Slido is. It's a good excuse to check your phones. I don't take it personal that you post on LinkedIn or you check your mails. No, but you actively participate during this fantastic briefing, and many are already almost on the way to Berlin. So we have a first question, and I would be interested in hearing your opinion. How do you assess the state of affairs when it comes to international climate protection 10 years, a decade after the Paris Agreement? You have different options to answer. On track, too slow but moving, significantly behind the targets, or in a crisis, or even backsliding. You know, Slido, you can mark an answer. You will be logged on as long as you, after you scan the QR code, and then we will check it out what the Wälzer, or those of you following us online at home. And maybe we have visitors from Brazil as well. Greetings go out and good morning to Belém. Let's check it out. Only 22 participants are online. I think there's room for improvement if I look around here. There are more people in the Wälzer. How do you assess the current state of international climate action a decade after the Paris Agreement? Importantly, you have to hit the send button. Don't forget that. And in parallel, let me check what time it is. Please hit the send button. If you didn't press send, you have to log in again. We're warming up right now. It's like a preliminary exercise, and that gives the minister some time to join us here. Three questions. No, the expert in the room. No, I would suggest we proceed to the next question because we want to see the answer here. Oh, so many devices I have to exercise and practice as well. Let's look at the first question. How do you assess international climate action a decade on? You say significantly behind, 38%, too slow but movement. Coming in second, and then let's have a look at the other questions. Another question was What must not be missing from any COP? A historic breakthrough at 4 a.m., maybe. A compromise that every country interprets in its own way. A selfie with the COP presidency. Or a lot of coffee and little sleep. We're curious to find out your answers. And I see the results here. All of you say a historic breakthrough at 4 a.m. in the morning. 42% voted. Coffee comes in at 20%, selfie at 2%. Apologies go out to Brazil. A compromise that every country interprets in its own way. 37%. A historic breakthrough at 4 a.m. I hope that takes place in the first week and not just during the last night. I hope we all of us hope that. Who will be on the ground? Who will be in Belen? Please let me see your hands. For all of you who will meet at coffee, maybe need a place to stay, you can create a network here. You can... Let's move on to the third question and check my watch. What was the host city of the 2004 COP? I hope you see the results on the screens on the left-hand and the right-hand side. Was it Buenos Aires, Montreal, New Delhi, or Milan? Who attended the COP in Buenos Aires? Let me see a show of hands. Wow, only a few. No, it's nothing embarrassing. It's all good. 2004 is quite some time ago. A lot has happened ever since, and I think we're also going to discuss this. Buenos Aires, is that correct? And the experts, of course, know the right answer. Whenever the door opens, I think we're ready, but we're not ready. We're not there yet.
Okay, then let's keep talking for a bit longer. We have a bit of a buffer in the program, and I'm actually happy to have more time for this because I want to give you an opportunity to network here within the hall regarding what we want to discuss on the panel. But first, I would like to see the first word cloud. Okay, are we going to have the word cloud? No. Okay, then let's make a cut because I've just been given the go to tell me that everybody's here now. They're coming, they're ready for us. And I'm saved by the bell here. Thank you very much. Welcome to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Johann Wadephul, and the other ministers joining him as well. Good morning, Mr. Wadephul. Welcome. And now I would like to welcome the Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs. The Minister for Economic Cooperation will be joining us later today. They all have a very full agenda, but it's a pleasure now to announce the official opening of this meeting to be given by the Federal Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, vielen Dank für die Geduld.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the patience. Thank you for waiting. Not only my schedule is full, but also the traffic situation is a bit difficult, especially difficult right now. And this is why we're a bit delayed. But I'm very happy, all the more happy to welcome you all of here, Honorable Ambassador, dear colleagues from the German Bundestag, Mr. Santarius, Mrs. Dröge, Mrs. Lallinger, Nalinga, Excellencies, dear guests. It's fall. We're feeling the cool Berlin wind. We had some sun. The Federal Foreign Office is hosting, together with the German Climate Consortium and the Foundation Climate Economy, to this year's COP briefing. Is it a well-established practice? No. The new federal government has assumed work half a year ago, and this also includes a reorientation, a new team when it comes to fighting climate change. Instead of the Foreign Office, the Federal Ministry for the Environment is assuming the lead at COP. But this does not mark the end of our international commitment and our fight against climate change. And the colleagues and the ambassadors at the embassies, our fight against climate change. No. And it doesn't end climate foreign policy, because climate change is a global problem, an existential threat to our security and our natural livelihoods. For many of our partners, climate change and the consequences of climate change are the existential challenges. And I could listen to many speeches, and I heard this during many talks during the UN General Assembly in New York in September, and I experienced this directly there. So climate change is one threat, and the Brazilian COP presidency calls it a Muzirau. It requires and calls us to join in a collective effort. There's no one in this federal government, no one who doesn't feel committed to this collective effort. Does that mean that things remain the same? No, but the difference between the democratic parties of our country is not to be found in the targets that result from the Paris Agreement and our commitment to climate neutrality in the year 2045, but what we deem to be the best path to reach these objectives from today's status quo. We want to become climate neutral whilst at the same time remain industrialized nation, as it is stipulated in our coalition treaty. The best way forward is to focus more on competitiveness and technological innovation instead of just regulation, because an energy transition and climate action in general can only be successful when it has the support of the population. And in practical terms, it means when energy is affordable and when jobs and resilient value-added chains emerge. But what role does climate policy play in foreign policy? It has a threefold function. Climate foreign policy it confronts a concrete threat to our security and thus our freedom and our prosperity. It's not just me saying this, but also the president of the BND, who assessed climate change as one of the 5 biggest external threats to Germany. We see how extreme weather events exacerbates conflicts surrounding resources in many places around the world, and how migratory and refugee crises intensify. We see that droughts have effects on water in the Rhine River and in the Panama Canal, and thus put the reliability of trade routes in question. And this is why the instruments of climate foreign policy protect us. I'd like to extend a warm welcome, Rim Alavadi Radovan, the Federal Minister for Development Cooperation. Because no matter what, no matter if we combine private and public funds in the Investing for Peace initiative in order to stabilize states, or whether we reduce emissions thanks to our partnerships beyond borders, whether we invest in measures to adapt to climate adaptation and conflict prevention in the tri-border area of Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia, prevention is always cheaper than tackling the consequences. This is our guiding principle. We're confronting a security threat. with our commitment to climate protection. But conversely, good climate policies increase our resilience. The Russian war of aggression in Ukraine has shown renewable energies and the diversification of our supply chains strengthen our security and our sovereignty. A decentralized energy system that flexibly combines different forms of energy production is more resilient than when millions of households depend on one single fossil power plant. Ask our Ukrainian friends. And this is also why we advocate for a energy transition and the diversification of energy imports and supply chains in the field of our energy foreign policy. The Canadian Minister of Defense, David McGuinty, said it like this at a NATO conference in Montreal. Investing, and I quote, investing in our ecosystems is strategic preparedness. It is national defense. It's natural security. I couldn't agree more. But climate foreign policy not only is an important part of our security policy and this is my second point, a door opener for new and strategic partnerships that we need. It is a realistic scenario for not too few states that parts of the country will be submerged in the ocean due to climate consequences. Of course, I think of small island states in the Pacific, but not just them. Indonesia, a country consisting of 17,000 islands and a powerhouse in the Indo-Pacific, has put climate change on the agenda of its G20 presidency in 2022. Climate change for many of our crucial partners is an existential question. In a world in which we're advocating for new partners, where we have to stand up for our geopolitical positions and have to diversify our trade relations, it would be a strategic disadvantage for us and our diplomacy if we had nothing to offer in the field of climate action. During the General Assembly of the United Nations, it was very important that we co-chaired together with Nauru the Group of Friends on Climate and Security, that we support small island nations like Tuvalu to digitalize their cultural heritage, that we are present as an interlocutor on the ground thanks to our embassies focusing on climate. All of this is not only an important and right commitment and commitment against climate change around the globe, but it's also prudent and smart strategic diplomacy. And this brings me to my last point. Climate foreign policy is also the promotion of foreign trade. If we, as global community, want to tackle the threat posed by climate change, we not only need new renewable energy systems, but also circular economy, water systems, and sustainable forest and agriculture. And when I say something on my trips that we have something on offer, then it's the best commitment to Made in Germany out there. 3 German companies are leading in electrolysis: ThyssenKrupp Nucera, Siemens Energy, and Sunfire. Clean technologies account for 8% of the German export volume, and it's a gigantic growing market. Our country is associated with top quality when it comes to automotive industry, engineering, chemical industry. When in a couple of years we could also add the attributes of clean and renewable, then not only did we strengthen the location of Germany, but we also lend a contribution to a big task of humanity. We want to lend a contribution to the promotion of the business community and the economy. So, ladies and gentlemen, a new government, new teams, a new strategy and a new tone and pragmatism focused on achieving goals. This is what marks our climate action, climate policies, and my climate foreign policy. I'm happy that we have you on board, you, the experts, and our international partners by our side when it comes to looking for the best path forward, openly, constructively, and with full commitment, a full commitment that is necessary for the collective effort in Mutzivrau. Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you, Minister. I think your agenda is calling you away, at least that is what I was told. So thank you very much for being here. And now I would like to welcome the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development. And I would like to hand the floor to Minister Reem Alabali Radovan. Well, I can still say, dear Minister, dear Johan, see you soon. Excellencies, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. There's a television series in Brazil that caused a lot of attention. It's called 3%. It's set in a dystopian world where people, due to climate change, are neglected and impoverished and have to live in slums. When youngsters turn 20, they can register for a screening test. The most successful 3% of candidates are then allowed to live the rest of their lives in a clean and safe colony. So 3%, let's assume there's about 500 people here in this room. So only 15 of you would have the opportunity to live such a privileged life. Yes, it's a television series, but if we're honest, for many people in the world, climate change has already become a kind of screening test. And it doesn't just screen them for a life and prosperity, it screens them for survival. If we, as the global community, don't act now with all our strength, then we will all end up in a world that is increasingly hot and uninhabitable, and only a privileged few would have access to the last resources. Yes, that is a dystopian view, but I think that in the year 2025, we should take off our rose-tinted spectacles. And so I would like to make the following 4 points that should guide climate action in the future. Point number 1. Climate action has to be socially just because climate change hits the poorest people hardest. People lose their harvests, they lose their houses, they lose their livelihoods. But being poor doesn't necessarily mean being weak. Many people have started to become creative and to think about new ways of how to deal with droughts, storms, and floods. In the Brazilian rainforest, for example, indigenous communities are maintaining the forest, and they are showing us here in Europe how economy and ecology can be balanced against each other. We can learn a lot from these communities, because every ton of CO2 that is emitted today changes our world of tomorrow in the form of lost harvests, natural disasters, and increasing cost for everyone. And we've only just seen the images of the hurricane, I think it's called Lisa, the hurricane that hit Jamaica, Cuba, and Haiti. Climate action is the only way for us here in Germany to continue to live in safety, security, and prosperity, because climate is changing for us as well, and droughts and floods are increasing like everywhere else in the world. My second point is that climate action is much cheaper than no climate action. From a development policy point of view, climate action is a benefit because every euro that we spend for climate action today will save us lots of euros in the future for mitigating climate damages. But climate policy is not only an ecological necessity, it is also a lucrative investment, and Minister Waterful just described this by citing German companies that work with clean technologies and export them to the world. Climate action and adaptation to climate change generate new markets, new technologies, and millions of new jobs worldwide. In Sao Paulo, for example, the metro operates with renewable energies. The parts for this were provided by German and European companies. And all of that is funded with German loans that will be paid back with interest. So this is a clear win-win model. It generates jobs, reduces emissions, and strengthens partnerships between countries, corporations, and people. For Germany, Brazil is a key strategic partner for climate action and also as our most important trading partner in South America. Not only because the Amazon River regulates the climate for the entire planet, but also because people in Brazil find solutions that we urgently need to strengthen our own resilience. Partnerships like the one with Brazil are essential for climate protection. The BMZ, the Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation, relies on the JETPs in this process, on the Just Energy Transition Partnerships. Their aim is to help the transition to renewable energies. These partnerships, for example, are in place with South Africa and Indonesia. Their economy is growing rapidly, but so is their demand for energy and their CO2 emissions. At the same time, these countries have a huge potential when it comes to solar, wind, and hydropower. These are the foundations for a clean energy future. And when emerging countries rely more on renewables than on coal, the climate can breathe more easily. This is worthwhile both for our partner countries and for our German economy, because the JETP partnerships strengthen our partner countries as locations of doing business. They generate new opportunity for private investment, and they open up opportunities for collaboration for German companies in future markets, especially in times of a lasting recession in Germany. So that is great news. Third point, climate action needs people who work together internationally. The climate crisis is still the largest global challenge of our time. We will only manage to contain it if we work together. Multilateral platforms like the COP are essential for this. And although some progress has been made in the 10 years since the Paris Agreement, our efforts are not sufficient. We need more speed and more political will, ambitious, nationally determined contributions, and definitely more participation from the private sector. With the Tropical Forest Forever facility, Brazil presented a proposal for how sustainable protection of the tropical forests can work in cooperation with the private sector. And we support this innovative proposal. For more speed and more political will, Germany is standing up and the BMZ is standing up at the negotiating tables around the world. And we're supporting all of those who want to stand up together with us, with specific projects on the ground, strategic partnerships, and through learning from one another. And that is why I say it very clearly. The goal of the BMZ at COP30 will be to strengthen multilateralism, to consolidate strategic alliances, and to expand our partnerships. And that takes me to the last point. Climate action helps eradicate poverty. Climate change has come to affect everybody, but not everybody in the same way. It hits the regions and groups hardest that have the least resources to start with: indigenous communities, women, migrants, and people living with disabilities. Countries in the global south are suffering the worst climate damages, despite being the ones who contributed least to climate change in the past. A natural disaster can wipe out decades of development success within minutes. And that is why we support the large climate funds in climate action and in their efforts to help adaptation to climate change. We also co-established the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. This fund supports the countries that are most affected by climate change in the global south. It supports them in mitigating climate damage. And I am really proud that this fund is nearly ready to accept the first applications. That is the kind of international solidarity and responsibility that I want to strengthen around the world. To translate this responsibility into specific results, the BMZ will work for three things above all at COP30. We want to close the gap between the NDCs and the 1.5 degree goal. That means that we will work harder to make our own targets for emissions reduction in Germany and the EU more ambitious, and to support our partner countries when it comes to planning and funding emissions targets. Secondly, we want to win over new donor countries in order to achieve the climate funding target of $300 billion per annum by 2035. Germany will continue to contribute its fair share, but it's clear that this alone is not enough. All countries that are able to have to contribute to climate financing, and it also means that the private sector has to make a contribution as well. The third point we want to work for is better climate adaptation around the world, and therefore we will work at the COP for a decision that strengthens national adaptation plans and that supports progress in areas such as food security, water, healthy ecosystems, social security, and cultural heritage. So we have a lot on our agenda. Climate action is essential for our survival, for everyone's survival. Because if we don't act now, then in future, only the privileged 3% will be able to live life in safety and prosperity. And that contravenes what we agreed on as a global community, leaving no one behind. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I know that you also have to move on to your next commitment. So thank you very much for being here. And now it is time to call on the third minister who is not able to be here in person because, as you know, Carsten Schneider, the Federal Minister for the Environment, Climate Action, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, and his State Secretary are in Brussels at the moment, but they send us the following video message. Dear colleague Alabali Radovan, Minister Radefuhl, representatives of the business and academic communities, members of the civil society, ladies and gentlemen. It was precisely 10 years ago that in Paris, the global community adopted the first universally binding agreement to counter the climate crisis. Before the Paris conference, many scientists warned that global warming would rise to 5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Some even spoke of 6 degrees. Thanks to global efforts, we are now on track to stay just below 3 degrees. That is a success, and it shows that multilateralism works. This becomes particularly clear when we look to renewable energies. For example, in the first half of this year, more power was generated from renewables than from coal for the first time. 2024, the share of investments in clean energies of $2 billion was almost twice as high as investments in fossil energies. And for this year, the International Energy Agency is predicting another record year for the expansion of renewable energies. And globally, more than 16 million people are working in the renewables sector. So we can see the renewables are seeing a long-lasting boom. And where do we stand here in Germany? In Europe? With approximately 50% share of renewables in our power generation in the EU, We are at the forefront and we want to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. All of this shows that we are seeing successes, but there are sectors such as transport or mobility where we haven't quite reached our targets. Climate action is a global task, so our work does not end at the German or European borders. We support ambitious projects for climate action through the International Climate Initiative. As a co-chair in the Climate Club, we are working with the other 46 members to solve the problem of speeding up industry decarbonization. With a view to the World Climate Conference, I can say that this is a decisive COP because the state parties have to present their new nationally determined contributions for 2035. As the EU, we are currently in the process of determining this contribution. These negotiations are the reason why I can't be here in person. I am currently attending the meeting of the EU Environment Council in Brussels, where I work for an ambitious climate target for 2040. That will be the cornerstone for the European NDC for 2035. And I think I can announce this NDC at the cabinet meeting on Wednesday. In Berlin, we have to find a joint answer to how to plug the gap between the current NDCs and the actually necessary reductions of emissions. There will be other topics to discuss in Berlin, for example, strong power grids. The COP28 in Dubai decided to have a tripling of renewable energies and a doubling of energy efficiency by 2030. And also the phase out of fossil energies. That has to be implemented consistently. We can shape history in a way that makes the world of tomorrow a better one. And the best way of achieving this is to cooperate closely. We must leave no one behind because climate change is probably the most important social question in the 21st century. I'm looking forward to the COP in Belém because it gives us an opportunity to move forward and to struggle and to fight for the important things together. Thank you. Greetings to Brussels, to Carsten Schneider and Jochen Flassbart. Now it is time to start with our first panel on the stocktake of the NDCs and high ambitions, asking the question of, are you going to stay for the panel or do you have to leave? Okay, if you have to leave, please take the opportunity to leave now so we can continue with the panel discussion. The question that you shouldn't miss now is how can a socially just implementation of climate action be speeded up? We will now close the door to make sure that the rest of you stay in the room. Thank you. We now have Dr. Heike Henn, Dr. Arthur Runge, Verena Bentle and Niklas Höhne on stage now for the panel discussion. Heike Henn, please come to the side here. Ms. Bentle, you have a microphone in front of you. Doors are closing, and now I will take the time to introduce you properly. Dr. Heike Henn is with us. She's the Director General for International Climate Policy in the Federal Ministry for Climate Action. Next to her is Dr. Arthur Runge Metzger, former Director of the Directorate General for Climate Policy of the European Commission, where he was in charge of climate policies, governance and climate legislation. He also represented the EU in international climate negotiations, among others, in the preparation for the climate agreement. Thank you very much for being here. Next to me is Lizzie Herzog, representative of Salzgitter AG. She's the head of the Berlin office of the Salzgitter Steel Company, one of the leading steel companies in Germany and Europe with 25,000 employees all over the world. in Salzgitter. They have the Salzgitter AG Strategy 2030 towards a sustainable steel industry, so we will hear more about that. And to her right is Professor Dr. Niklas Höhne, climate expert and co-founder of the New Climate Institute. Thank you very much for being here. And last but not least, it's a pleasure to have Verena Bentele here, president of the Social Association VDK Germany. That is the largest social association of Germany, and it offers to its 2.3 million members advice on social justice and social laws in Germany. Thank you very much to all participants for being here. I would now like to invite you to send your questions via the QR code. They will be sent straight to my iPad, because this is not a one-way street. We want to ask your questions in this panel discussions. I would like to start with Niklas Höhne and then move on to Heike Henn. Niklas, where are we globally when it comes to the new NDCs for 2035? We heard about that in the workshops, but please tell us a bit more about opportunities for an accelerated implementation of the climate targets. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. We're now talking about Paris a decade on, so it's important to look back for 10 years and see where we were at the time. And back then, with all the measures implemented, it still looked as though the global greenhouse gas emissions would rise and we would end up with 4 degrees, maybe 3.5 by the end of the century, and that would have led to disastrous climate change that we would not be able to deal with. Fortunately, that scenario is off the table. Global emissions have hopefully peaked this year, and the measures we're taking now will hopefully lead to emissions plateauing and later going down, taking us below 3 degrees, 2.5 degrees. That's almost 1 degree better than 10 years ago, but unfortunately it'll still lead to disastrous climate change that we will not be able to handle. But what is important about the Paris Agreement is that it set new visions, phasing out coal and gas, being climate neutral in Germany 2045, EU 2050, China 2060, India 2070, and if all the countries do what they propose to achieve this, we will reach below 2 degrees global warming by the end of the century, and I think that would be a great success. Not enough, but at least it's going in the right direction. Well, let's zoom into this just briefly. You said it's not enough. What are the deficits that you clearly want to point out here? Well, the Paris Climate Agreement is based on new targets being proposed every 5 years, and one of these deadlines has come now. So the current round of climate targets is disappointing. 2/3 of the countries haven't presented any NDCs at all, and 1/3 has presented NDCs that are not much more ambitious than the ones they had before. So if you calculate global temperatures based on the targets last year and this year, you will see that there's no change. That is disappointing. The appetite to do more climate action internationally or to commit to more climate action internationally is not very great because of the geopolitical situation and things that are going on. But for 2 reasons, that's wrong, because for one thing, we know that climate change is extremely expensive and that it's progressing every day, so we have to do something about it. And secondly, the situation is completely different than it was 10 years ago. Renewables have become incredibly cheap. They are cheaper than fossil energies almost everywhere in the world, and countries can do more in this regard, and they are doing more. So the new targets don't really reflect the current situation, and we can actually do more and have to do more than what we are committing to internationally. Well, thank you for kicking off the stocktake of the NDCs. That takes me back to the core question of this discussion of how can we achieve and how can we speed up a socially just implementation of climate action. Dr. Heike Henn, can the COP speed up the socially just implementation of climate targets, climate action, and if yes, with which tools? Well, thank you very much for having me, and please bear with me for rushing away to the airport, as you said earlier. We have already heard the very good keynotes by the ministers about the social dimension of climate change and climate action. This has a national side for every country, but also an international dimension that we discuss at the COP. And today, negotiations are going on about the EU 2040 target and the EU NDC for 2035. Negotiations are difficult because the social dimension raises questions of competitiveness, loss of jobs in Germany and in Europe. We just heard about the trend of not doing much more because of the current situation. So what can the COP do nationally and internationally? Each and every country is bringing this burden, this baggage to the COP and is trying to get international support. And both in the negotiations at the COP, but also in the action agenda, there is mutual support. If we look to Brazil now, on the negotiation side, we don't have any pressing issues that we have to discuss where we have breakthroughs at 4 a.m. The breakthrough might be linked to the time of day when it occurs, but not to the actual subject matter of the discussions. But the Just Transition Work Program, for example, is one item on the agenda for the negotiations where we will have to talk about what is a just transition. And we have to discuss this within our countries, but also with each other internationally. We also heard about consequences of climate change. That's also a question of social justice. So if we determine the indicators, which is part of the agenda at the COP, but we also generate mutual trust when it comes to funding adaptation to climate change and initiatives that strengthen our joint projects, then I think these are important building blocks. And you may find it surprising to hear this from the Environment Ministry. Competitiveness is also an issue of social justice for the countries that are first movers, like the EU, but also others. Brazil, for example, is dealing with the question of carbon leakage. And I'm really interested to see what we will discuss in Belém in this regard. There are many different dimensions to climate action, but the social justice question needs a solution, particularly for the most vulnerable countries. As a federal government, we have a few things to offer. We want to build bridges. We want to be ambitious when it comes to transitioning away from fossil fuels. That's also a question of social justice. But we also want to offer support for the most vulnerable countries when it comes to funding their response to loss and damages. How does Germany have to move if it wants to take the lead in these negotiations in Belém? Can you tell us what we have to be prepared for? We want to build bridges and we want to build trust. The outcome of the negotiations in Brussels will be very important for that. Nobody is listening to us when I talk about climate action or healthy diets while I'm eating crisps myself. So if my actions don't match my words, people won't take me seriously. That's the first step. So if we don't achieve that, we can't be the champion that drives forward a roadmap for phasing out fossil fuels in Belém. That's my first point. So I'm still very hopeful for our role in that. And the Environment Minister and the federal government are also standing up for the climate funding target that we adopted in Baku. The world hasn't become an easier place, but we stand by this funding target, all of its element, the 300 billion and the $1.3 trillion, because money is not everything to make a just transition, but money is required. And so are political conditions. So if we pledge support The minister mentioned strong power grids, and the BMZ will be supporting this with its partnership, and the Environment Ministry will also support this. And we also want to drive initiatives for climate adaptation. We want to support the ambitious measures of the small island states for a 1.5 target. And every year at the COP, we want to work towards our core mission from the Paris Agreement, which is not to find that the gap between the NDCs and the climate target has become greater, but rather our job is to close this gap.
Noch Fragen aus dem Publikum.
Thank you very much. We'll get back to you. There are questions from the audience. Mr. Runge, one question to you. Looking to Brussels, a lot of attention is focused on Brussels. It's an important day. The world is looking over to the European Union. How do you assess the dilemma that we're fighting for the NDC decision? Is the EU perceived as a credible leader in climate action? Well, I think there are many questions whether the Europe will be assuming the leadership role as the fight against climate change is concerned, whether it's the reduction of emissions or the adaptation. But I believe what's important for Europe is the following. It's important to convey to the partners what is happening in Europe. What are the reasons? What are the reasons why the ministers are debating and struggling for this target? What's behind that? And we take this climate target seriously, and we ask our questions, how can we actually implement it? And we realized in the past years it's not that easy to increase the share of renewables, and that's it. No, we also need to look at houses, insulation, energy, heating, and mobility, and the individual citizens. And we have to be open as politicians and say we may not have always offered the right solutions. We always said that we shouldn't leave anyone behind. Everyone should participate, but how serious were we about it? And the citizens put that in question at present. And this is what this struggle is about. And Europe has to show what kind of solutions do we have in the coming years and in the past. While at how we achieve efficiency on the one hand, but on the other hand, also say how do we create a just way forward. So we have had some experience that we were able to share. The countries in Europe are positioned very differently. The per capita income varies greatly between the regions, and in the past, political decisions in Brussels were made that everyone could go back home and say, yes, that it could work for us as well. But at present, it's put into question, and it's a struggle about discussion about the right way forward. And we need to convey this, but I don't think it's the end of the leadership in the fight against climate change. No, in the end, we need to find answers, and if we are able to present answers, then we can engage in proactive partnerships. So, looking to Berlin, how can the EU be credible while at the same time an ambitious partner at the negotiating table? Well, I think we've heard this today many times already. Of course, we traveled to Berlin with a certain amount of disappointment because few countries have moved forward with new commitments. So I would hope that some will pack something in their suitcases on the trip to Berlin. I think 75 countries outed themselves with new NDCs, and I hope the numbers are increasing in the next days and weeks, although while the ministers also are there. And the second aspect is we need to acknowledge that we have this gap so that we don't are not rushing to the 1.5 objective, but that we need to realize that much more needs to be done, and we need to implement policies. One reason why many didn't submit a new pledge or offer is the fact that they have difficulties sticking to their pledges. So the partnerships we engage in with the countries are not far-reaching enough. So we didn't share as to how climate action can be done so that it can be used by all citizens and is useful. So we need to go into more depths, the JETPs with Indonesia, South Africa, and Vietnam. Fair enough, but many countries are waiting for JETPs and ask, when do my JETPs come? Let me talk about implementation and move on to Mrs. Bentele from the EU level and move it to the local perspective and to move it and talk about implementation. Mrs. Bentele, how can we reach out to those people who are confronted with tremendous challenges when it comes to implementing these targets? Well, thank you so much for inviting me. The ministers also highlighted this, that those people require support who belong to the vulnerable groups, single-parent families, poor people, people who don't have much money, people with handicaps, people who live by busy roads. And for those people, climate action must not be a luxury topic, but it's exciting to see that all the measures should become visible in all sectors. For instance, the support for e-vehicles, and this would make the topic of e-vehicles more interesting. For us, in my association, it would be important that these subsidies are paid out according to socially just standards. There are people in this room who wouldn't need these subsidies and buy a vehicle nonetheless. But when looking to our members who live in rural areas where there is no public transport, no infrastructure, but let's assume we're not somewhere in Bavaria where there are no charging stations, but we are in areas where there are charging stations for e-vehicles, then for us, a relevant factor would be to support those people who feel disassociated from these debates. It's not helpful for industry or the people if they perceive it as a topic that doesn't support the people on the ground. Politically, the term Klimageld, climate money, is an old term. Let's call it differently. Compensation, for instance, because mobility becomes more expensive, and just compensation, according to social benchmarks, would be advisable. The people need support when, as owners of houses, and that affects 30% of people owning homes, so that these people receive support to refurbish their homes. The Gebäudeenergiegesetz, the law pertaining to the energy of housing, contained good elements that were watered down in the political debate. Social support, or the support for social justice, played an important role. And I think it's crucial. The problem that we have as society, and I'm referring to all parts of society, we have a collective task, a responsibility to not just transfer the problem to the individual person and cause and stir up a fake debate when discussing vegetarianism. And I say this as a vegetarian. We need to do our part. Thank you very much, Mrs. Bentele. You mentioned it, but now we want to turn to industry. Mrs. Herzog, Salzgitter AG 2030. You talked about the path forward. Maybe you could talk about where we stand when it comes to CO2 reduced, carbon reduced steel production. Thank you very much for the invitation. Let me give you a couple of facts and figures to illustrate why it's important that the steel industry becomes carbon neutral. The Salzgitter AG represents 1% of German CO2 emissions. Some say, oh, that's a lot. Others say few. I think it's a lot. The steel industry is about 7% and 30% of industrial emissions. And when it comes to the topic of steel, at the beginning of many value-added chains, we have a great lever to switch to climate neutral production, and it is possible. It's relatively easy to do in comparison to other sectors of industry. And here, my company, we are in the middle of switching over to green steel. That means we're building new sites, we establish new production processes. It's a major construction site. Please come to Salzgitter. Call me if you want to see it. It's very impressive indeed. We're building a new site. We have green electricity, green hydrogen, and this will enable us to produce green steel. And one would say, yes, we're in the middle of it. The sites, the production facilities are already there. Such a site, a direct reduction plant, is about as high as a wind power plant, and we have some already there. So that shows we are actually persevering. We are implementing. We have to do it no matter what. And 2027, we go into production of 2027, so the day after tomorrow. Well, have you already pledged the steel? Yes, we already sold it. And yes, we received positive feedback. The automotive industry, white goods. But I don't want to hide from you the fact that it's not that easy. We need political support in order to be successful with our green steel production. And this brings us to the business location Germany. We're reading news. On Friday, there will be a summit on steel in Germany at the Chancellor's office. How can we shape production in order to preserve and to improve the business location, the location of industry for Germany? First of all, one needs to ask the question, why do we do that? Climate neutral steel, it's fairly easily done. We are at the beginning of the value-added chains, and industry in Germany is interlinked. And if you could say, well, you can import steel, let's take Chinese steel, easy. No, it's dovetailed in a way in Germany that these value-added chains will be disrupted, so it will not function in the future. So I'm happy that the summit will take place in the Chancellery. In the coalition agreement, it is stipulated that we want to preserve the steel industry. The question is how, but the commitment is there to engage at this summit. The question is what will be the outcomes and what will be implemented, but the steel industry is on board and will switch to green steel. And this brings me to the topic of opposition to climate action from the business community, from industry. You have a clear stance on that, because there are some people who oppose climate action. Received a clear statement that was contained in the Nano report that it wouldn't make sense to turn around, or how did you phrase it? Well, the most expensive scenario is the one without climate action. We couldn't do business. Our society would not survive. So we are really, really late. I was positive in the beginning, but we will achieve the 1.5 degree in the 2030s. So we need to move faster and do more. It's extremely important. So there are people who say, well, we can relent in our efforts when it comes to climate action. And this is disastrous indeed, in my point of view. there is not the economy. There are so many different sectors of industry, and those who relied on innovation, who looked into the future and said, yes, we're developing carbon neutral steel, wind energy, electromobility, electrolyzers, and so on. All of those would be punished for moving ahead. And those who are supported are those who lean back and say, oh, hopefully things will not turn out the way it was planned and we could pursue our fossil business. And this would be disastrous indeed. And the oil and gas industry at present is very strong. Probably the richest industry in the world. Trillions of profits. That's a lot of profits per day. So it's the strongest lobby you can imagine. And they would benefit if we were to relent in our efforts when it comes to climate action. And I think society shouldn't and doesn't like that. And this brings me to your question. Thank you so much for sending us your questions. It worked out well, better than in the beginning. Thank you very much. Please feel free to send your questions. Heike Henn, you need to leave. Germany is one of the few countries which still funds projects, fossil projects abroad. How can Germany be so credible for the TAFF? Well, we have clear guidelines and only limited exceptions where fossil financing funding is possible abroad. We have guidelines for the KfW, and we also have other instruments in the multilateral development banks. So we have made great progress also in international comparison when looking at other partners, but it is a topic that we continue to look at internally. Allow me to add one comment, Katie. I would like to get back to the aspect of ambition and tying it to the business community. From the perspective of my ministry, you will not be surprised that we stand up for international ambition, climate action, because science tells us that it's the right thing to do. And we're clear in the federal government, it's not the right thing to do for the climate if we campaign for international ambition, but it's also clear it's the best thing for the German industry and the business community. We have the market, we have it's important for our competitiveness, and we have no regrets, and this is how we move to Brussels and also to Berlin. And does this hold true for the Federal Ministry of the Economy? Yes, we are united in this stance. Thank you very much. We meet again in Berlin. You have to get your flight. Thank you very much. Dr. Heike Henn, please give us a round of applause. Have a safe flight. Let's move on to the questions in the chat. The role and the progress in the circular economy, cradle to cradle. What roles do these approaches play when it comes to achieving the goals? How would you assess that also when looking at the EU level, what the EU wants to do and can do?
Well, we won't be able to achieve our targets without circular economy. That's the simple answer. And personally, I'm disappointed that we haven't moved any further with that in recent years. We have to send out clear signals, not only because of climate change, but also for reasons of our national security that Minister Wadefuhl mentioned at the beginning of this session. There are many reasons for driving forward the circular economy. And I'm not only talking about the production side, but also about the demand side. We also need demand for products generated in circular economy. And I think that is where politicians are called upon. We have to build up leading markets in this area to generate demand for products resulting from the circular economy, because an industry can only exist if it has a business case, and that's what we need our lead markets for. And I think in Europe, we can learn some good lessons from the past. How did we build up renewables? They didn't just come from the sky, but it required active policies where we said that the power generated by renewable power plants has to be used and has to be consumed. So banks handed out loans that allowed energy companies to change over to renewables. And I think that is an approach that we also need in other industries. And I'm surprised at the reluctance, the political reluctance in this regard. Ms. Herzog, we're also looking to Salzgitter. You're not reluctant. You are committed to the circular economy and to the establishing of green lead markets, because steel as such is a very recyclable raw material. What is Salzgitter AG doing to drive forward the circular economy? Well, in practice, the circular economy is already part and parcel of our daily work at Salzgitter. Steel is endlessly recyclable. So we need more scrap that we can use to produce green steel with our green steel plants. It's not easy to get the scrap because everybody wants to have it. And the issue of lead markets is essential for us. It's the question of how can we introduce green steel into future markets and what incentives are there to make all of this fly. And that takes me to many discussions that we have with our customers. But the state can go forward with a good example, and it can lead by example when it comes to public procurement, where the state has a lever to establish green steel as a product in the market. And that is not the case at the moment, because it would be an easy lever. Where do you see hindrances for green steel in the market? We're in a closed setting here. Well, at the moment, this is being implemented. The question is how consistently it's being implemented. At the moment, green steel is being established in procurement law. The question is whether the federal government will use this opportunity for implementing green steel in its procurement processes. But with view to green steel coming to our portfolio in 2027, we really need this to move forward. If you remember the COP briefing for COP28, we already discussed this and not much has happened since, or am I wrong? Well, last year it was really bad timing because unfortunately, the government broke down and now we're starting from scratch again. So we have to talk to the new government. We have to say to them how important green steel is. We've now moved on one step further, and I'm really interested to see what's going to happen in the coming weeks, what steps the federal government will actually take to make a commitment for climate-friendly raw materials. Thumbs up or thumbs down for Thursday? Well, I'm an optimistic person. There is an addition to this, and then we'll move on to more questions. Well, just to add to this, actually, I don't want to add to this. I want to contradict what you said. Just imagine that we tried to implement renewable energies through voluntary tenders by member states in their public procurement. It wouldn't have worked. I think we need much stronger political tools to support green steel. And I'm surprised that the steel industry isn't calling for these political tools and isn't calling on the best practice examples that we have from renewable energies. We have to look at the entire steel market and we have to say, well, we have to green this steel market. How can we achieve this? And I don't think we will be able to do without quota here. Minister Wadefuhl said that regulation isn't the right approach, but I actually think it's the only approach. It's the only way forward. If everybody takes part and if everybody gets behind this, it becomes feasible. Just imagine what municipalities would say if they had to build their hospitals and their childcare centers with 100% green steel. they would groan from the additional financial burden, and I don't think it would work without political support and political tools. And we need powerful tools to tackle this problem. And we have to be brave in our approach to this. Professor Höhne, I'm looking to you. You're welcome to comment this as well, but I would also like to ask you a question from the audience. How do you assess the risk of energy-intensive production moving abroad, and what mechanisms could stem this outflow of energy-intense industries? Of course, that is a big question, but the current situation that we have, lots of energy-intensive industry emissions trading schemes that allow us to offset the fossil energies, that put a price on fossil energies, that generates income. And companies that want to transition towards green raw materials, towards green steel, can be supported with this income, with this money. There are also systems like the border mechanism, the CBAM mechanism, that puts a penalty on the import of non-green raw materials, non-green steel, for example. And as a basic principle, this is a good mechanism and it shouldn't be watered down. We can see that there's a lot of resistance against that. There's a lot of resistance against the emissions trading scheme that is finally working well after 20 years. And there is resistance against the CBAM mechanism, which from my point of view is essential to keep the entire system going. And the idea is that these mechanisms generate revenue, both the emissions trading system and the CBAM mechanism, and that this revenue can be used to support the transition of industry towards greener technologies and greener raw materials. Ms. Benteler, I'll come to you in a minute, but I just want to step in here and talk about the overall political situations and about the withdrawal of the US from various sectors, including the sector of climate action. And a question from the chat is, what is the impact of the withdrawal of the US from climate policy, from climate action, and what can Germany and the EU do to mitigate the impact of this withdrawal of such an important player? Professor Höhne, first you, and then I'm looking to the other end of the panel. Well, the situation with the US is problematic for many reasons. The national government is moving outside the world of facts. It's building an autocratic system. It's putting other nations under pressure who are not going in their direction. That's an important problem. In the past, the US just completely stayed out of international negotiations. That was the case with Trump 1, but also under Bush. And the international plastics negotiations and the negotiations on international shipping show that the US is actually working against climate action. And that is a new dimension, one that was probably present in the background before, and now they are actually doing it overtly together with Qatar. They threatened Europe with turning off the gas tap if there are rules for US companies in climate protection. So the situation has changed, and we've just heard that the US is not sending a delegation to the COP. That's a good sign, because at least officially they can't contravene the negotiations. What they do in the background is a different story. But this is important. And that's also why I hope that at this COP, the countries get together who are in favor of a rule-based order, who are in favor of cooperation, and who want to send a clear signal that there is a global problem that can only be solved together by cooperation and on the basis of jointly agreed rules. Mr. Runge-Metzger, do you agree? Do you see this as an opportunity for Europe, for Germany to take a stronger role, and a role that means we don't need as much support from the EU, from the US? Well, I would say it's an opportunity to set up an international cooperation. We're not allowing anyone to hide behind the US to say the US as a major emitter has the largest debt, and if they are not getting involved, then we won't get involved either. Instead, we have to argument proactively that we all benefit from action against climate change. The fact that the US is withdrawing at the moment, and we have to ask who in the US is withdrawing, because there's also the We Are All In movement in the US on a corporate level and also on a federal state level, where innovation is still taking place in clean tech. And I remember the Bush administration, when Bush said we will withdraw from climate action, General Electric actually continued to develop its wind turbines in Europe and exported its knowledge and its potential to Europe, only taking it back to the US later. So there can actually be positive effects in the sense that US companies try to export to other countries, try to keep on their path in other countries. And that is a business opportunity also for companies in the US under the Trump administration. Now, a question to Ms. Bentley. And we were talking about vulnerable groups such as indigenous communities, young people, people living with disabilities. How can they be involved in decision making when it comes to climate action? Where do you see important to-dos? Well, when we're talking about Trump, I think education and information is not the way to success. I have more hope for this approach in Germany. I disagree with Minister Wadefuhl because I believe in regulation, and that is the best way of involving people if the legal framework is right. For example, if topics like a speed limit that have been discussed for years were actually implemented, it would be no question whether you stick to the tempo limit or not. Or when we're talking about energy renovation in housing, low energy housing, or when we talk about climate friendly food, such as fruit, vegetables, and pulses that should be exempted from VAT. These are political conditions, political frameworks that allow including everyone, and that also set up a funding framework that would, for example, enable older people to get a loan for energy friendly renovation of their homes. And giving older people these loans would mean that, for example, they only have to pay back the loan when they leave the house in inheritance. And that would mean that groups like older people would be willing and able to take part in such measures. And once they become active players, they would also be able to shape political frameworks. The problem is that these discussions are not accessible for poor people, for people who live in rural areas and can't do without a car, people who can't walk far, who have to use the car to get into towns. For these people, taking part in political designs is difficult. For example, if fuel costs increase, for people who drive an SUV, it won't matter much. But for people who are struggling to operate a small car, who are driving a smaller, older car, they are the ones who have a problem. And I hope that good political frameworks, support for infrastructure, funding for infrastructure, and conferences that strengthen municipal funding, like the one we had yesterday, that these will show people how the state works, how the government works, how the rule of law works, how cities work, how public transport works, and how they can be designed in a way that is accessible for everyone. And I think that would be a way of involving everybody more. I don't really believe in voluntary approaches because we see that good positive regulation ultimately boosts innovation. And I would rely on regulation for more climate-friendly urban planning, which is an important issue in Germany already, because that releases the creative potential of politicians and of people on the ground. Thank you, Ms. Bentley. You mentioned the local leaders summit that took place yesterday in Rio, where mayors got together, where the local level got together. I will just move to another dimension with another question from the chat. Perhaps you can answer the question for Germany or also with your European experience, because Ms. Henn is no longer with us. The question is, should Germany and Europe support Colombia's proposal for a declaration for a phase out of fossil fuels? And could that be a first step towards a roadmap? This is a crystal ball question, but perhaps you can take that look into the crystal ball and see where you see the opportunities. Well, I can answer this question just as a citizen. And as a citizen, I would hope that Germany and Europe pull in this direction and commit to a phase out of fossil fuels. The discussion of subsidies for fossil energies is one that we've had for a long time in Europe, and I still think we don't have satisfactory answers to this question yet. There's a lot to be done also on a European level to answer the question of how can we design an economic policy that does not directly or indirectly subsidize fossil fuels. And that is a question that we should try and answer, and that is part of this declaration. So I think it would be a good idea for Germany and Europe to support this. Okay, then last question to all of you. What would be the most important outcome of COP30? The most important outcome would be to make it clear that we have missed the target, but to propose a plan for measures that are serious. We mustn't have another commitment and another round of blah blah, as some will say. We have to have substantial proposals, and that is always linked to investment, to partnerships and cooperation. So if there was new movement where countries say, okay, we're going to stand together and we want to move forward together, hand in hand with the business community, I think that would be an important signal from Belém. Thank you, Dr. Arthur Runge-Metzger, for having been here. What would be the most important outcome of COP30 from your point of view? Well, I will give you a personal answer. For me, it would be best if climate action gained more attention, also with normal people, as it were, also interest from the media, and if we could see momentum away from this discussion of climate action and transformation and towards more courage to say, yes, we will manage it, we will do it, and we will do something to achieve the targets. Ms. Bentley, what would be the most important outcome of COP30 from your point of view? Well, an athlete would never have an unrealistic target without a training plan. I think it's important to have a plan. We mustn't lose sight of the targets. And I really hope that climate action is considered as a community project, not just a project for the politicians, for industry, and not for consumers, for example. And I'm referring to this not only to individual consumers, but also as states who are continuing to consume. This is an issue for the global community. We all have to get behind this together if we want to achieve the target. And Professor Dr. Niklas Höhne. Well, thank you. I also hope that positive signals will be sent from this conference and that we will move forward with slowing down. You don't overtake others. And so it's important to show that all the countries stand behind the rules-based collaborative system and that they commit together to more climate action in cooperation with each other, with social justice between the countries. And there should be a clear signal against the perceived trend that there are more and more players that put their head in the sand. The opposite has to happen. We need more momentum to move forward. Well, we are now moving forward towards the coffee break, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all back here at 3:15 in half an hour. I'm looking forward to welcome the ambassador of Brazil to Germany for the next round. And we will also have panelists from the BMZ, the Environment Ministry, and other organizations here on stage. So this is another opportunity to ask your questions to representatives from the ministries. See you back here at 3:15.
Wunderbar. Und damit sind wir zurück.
Wonderful. That means we're back. A warm welcome to the new faces, the people who have spent the last hours with us, and to the people in the live stream. Welcome back. Willkommen zurück to our COP30 briefing with entitled 10 Years Paris Agreement. Where do we stand when it comes to climate action? And before we talk to the Brazilian ambassador to Germany, I look forward to an input by Professor Dr. Mercedes Bustamante from the University of Brasilia on the topic climate, forest protection, and biodiversity.
Bustamante, I'm a professor at the University of Brasilia, Brazil. I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to be with you here today. I would like to discuss some aspects related to the interactions between climate, ecosystems protection, and biodiversity. The message is clear that without immediate and ambitious actions to limit global warming to safe levels and avoid the worst impacts of climate change, sustainable development cannot be achieved. The next few years will be critical, but are ways to improve our chances of success. We also need to talk about the risks associated to overshooting. Rapid and robust climate action is also critical to reduce the risks associated with overshooting, because even a temporary period of warming above 1.5 degrees Celsius can cause lasting damages. Some questions will guide this presentation. The first one is: what opportunities and risks does climate action present for biodiversity and ecosystems protection? Health ecosystems are the key element that connect climate mitigation and adaptation and biodiversity protection. Interactions between biodiversity and climate action also need to be considered in terms of carbon storage. A recent study showed that biodiversity loss reduced global terrestrial carbon storage. Nature-based solutions designed to protect, manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystems can address not only biodiversity and climate crisis, but also societal challenges in an effective and adaptive way. They offer significant social, ecological, and economic benefits, outweighing costs in the long term and on a global scale, but it's necessary to consider the different contexts and approaches. Also, time is a critical point in this equation, because natural sinks, terrestrial ecosystems and oceans, are already decreasing in response to climate change, as many recent studies are showing. The large-scale implementation of natural-based solutions can be complex and require coordination between multiple actors. Some of the potential risks and trade-offs include poorly designed afforestation that solely focuses on carbon offsets without adequate biodiversity safeguards, and conflicting sectoral policies such as trade and investments and energy agreements. The second questions focus on what strategies are the most effective in integrated climate, ecosystem protection, and biodiversity science into political decision-making at national and international levels. Firstly, the coordinated NDCs and national strategies and action plans connected to global biodiversity conservation can align goals and create synergies between climate action and biodiversity protection. This alignment helps mobilize integrated finance, coordinate implementation, and streamline monitoring and reporting. Also, developing more coherent policies include cross-sectoral working groups, integrated permitting process assessing both climate and biodiversity impacts, and unified budgetary mechanisms that can address both crises at the same time. In this context, subnational and transnational networks involving cities, regions, and industry sectors can also enable policy innovation, accelerate learning, and create implementation pathways that complement national policies. The third question is what opportunities exist for national and regional policymakers in long-term international commitments, but how can different actors create and strengthen synergies between climate and biodiversity protection, ensuring social equity? Policymakers can coordinate action across all levels of governance and society, breaking down ministerial silos, developing joint climate and biodiversity policies, and also created integrated monitoring systems, leveraging existing policies opportunities, and also identify policy windows during the revision process for climate plans and biodiversity strategies. The scientific community can help develop integrated assessment methodologies, creating indicators for monitoring co-benefits, and also bridging knowledge systems by recognizing and integrating the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities and their knowledge systems. Civil society can help engaging in strategic civic actions, identifying high impacts for both climate and biodiversity, and also creating political space for ambitious climate policies, and also participating in transnational climate litigation and advocacy networks. And finally, economic actors can help advancing economic model transformation to support nature-based solutions, circular economies, and payment for ecosystem services. It's also important to implement emergent frameworks to increase transparency and redirect financial flows toward positive outcomes. It's important to remind here that over 50% of the global GDP depends on nature, and biodiversity loss can cause economic and human health risks. But nowadays, harmful subsidies and externality far exceed conservation funding. So shifting financial towards common goals related to sustainable development goals, climate protection, and biodiversity is an essential step. And the last question that I would like to address is how we can interlink the goals of Rio Conventions that are essential to achieving global sustainability goals, but how can we make conventions and associated scientific panels work together in a more effective way? Synergies streamline monitoring, financing, and capacity building, reducing transaction cost, optimizing resource use, and encourage cross-sector policies. A synergistic approach amplifies the impact of policies and will help to move faster and to the right directions. Actions in one domain can reinforce progress in others, creating a multiplier effect for planetary and human well-being. But how we can then move forward? There are pathways for enhanced collaboration, for example, formalized cooperation mechanisms through decision of parties via party-driven process under each convention. Permanent Rio Conventions joint liaison group, working group with a clear mandate and resources. Enhance scientific integration between IPCC and IPBES to produce more integrated assessments, and also again align financial mechanisms and support the structure to enable integrated implementation. As final remarks, we call here for integrated policies and investments. There are undeniable synergies with measurable benefits that highlight the urgency of integrated conservation and climate strategies. We still face funding challenges, so alignment of finances to close the finance gap for nature and climate positive actions and cutting harmful subsidies and investments is fundamental. Global policies and initiatives could leverage efforts, but they need to consider regional context, the potential for regional cooperation and critical role of capacity building and technology transfer. And finally, the protection of biodiversity and ecosystem services should be prioritized in policy frameworks to maximize synergies and avoid siloed approaches. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you to Mercedes Bustamante of Brasilia. And now it's my big pleasure to welcome His Excellency here on stage. And we're switching now into English, as you can hear. Sorry for that. But I welcome you on stage, His Excellency Rodrigo Buenos Soares. His Excellency, we have a quick sit down for a conversation before I, of course, have a look again into our Slido chat, because I always invite the whole audience again, and this is the kind of invitation to all of you to send us your questions via Slido. You can see, and you know the procedure already, this is the QR code of today, or the code of the day, so please submit your questions, and then of course I will forward them to His Excellency Rodrigo Buenos Soares, the Ambassador of Brazil based here in Berlin. His Excellency, when we talk about the COP30, and when we talk about having it as successful COP30 in Berlin, what does success mean in your definition?
Thank you. First, and thank you for this invitation. And it's a privilege to be here in such a distinguished audience. Many of you will have this privilege as well to go to Belém do Pará, in the heart of the Amazon region. And it's my father's hometown. I've been there many, many times. I'm sure you enjoy it. Listen, I think many doubt that it would be possible to hold a COP in Belém do Pará, the heart of the Amazon region. But there was a great mobilization, a night and day work, and lots of sense of solidarity that made that possible. And finally, we are ready to host and to receive, to welcome representatives from over 200 countries in Belém do Pará. Of course, the fact that we are holding this COP30 in Belém demonstrates and reinforces the Brazilians' commitment to inclusion, the appreciation of indigenous people, and climate justice. And my president, President Lula, has said that COP30 is a COP of truth, calling on world leaders to really be responsible and committed to effective action for the planet. And of course, I'd like to underline the three main, the core of our proposals, of our plan of action in Belém do Pará, which are first the TFFF, our flagship initiative, I might say. The second is the Belém Commitment for Sustainable Fuels, what we call Belém 4X. And then the Belém Declaration on Hunger, Poverty, and Fight Against Poverty, and the people-centered climate action. So these are the three main features of our participation in Belém that we are proposing to the participants to discuss and have a concrete results. We called the COP30 the COP of implementation. We have discussed a lot. We have been 10 years from the Paris Agreement. We have a big institutional framework already in many different aspects, and mitigation, adaptation, fight against poverty, indigenous people. But it's time is up to deliver and to implement these commitments made so many times in so many COPs before.
Let's dive into some of the keywords that you've just mentioned. And of course, we earlier also spoke about the NDCs pathways, which are not always on track, because we can see, also scientifically speaking, a significant gap. What role do you see can the COP30 play in that regard, in closing the gap and building more bridges that we need?
We had a very important achievement, which was the launch of the report, the NDC report, was last October, I think, last month, released by the Secretariat of the UNFCCC. there are positive signs that we're clearly bending the emissions curve downwards for the first time, although it's not in the good pace. We need to speed up this process. So that's why I'm saying that we have this positive sign that there are positive developments, but at the same time, not in the pace that we need at this time. And also the report issues and the collective mission of COP30 to respond to this climate urgency that we have, that no one is denying, and accelerate implementation, as I said, solidarity and ambitious international cooperation. I might say that we have already presented our NDC, and that was last year. There was the 57 to 65% for 2035, taking the numbers of 2005. So we did our homework, as I mentioned, and you mentioned the NDC, we need this COP to be the COP of implementation, and with an emphasis on translating the UNFCCC regulatory framework in concrete actions. Also, I have the World Bank estimates that robust adaptation measures can yield up to 4 times their cost in economic benefits, which is a very important message from the World Bank. And also one of the initiatives is putting forward is the roadmap Baku to Belém, or $1.3 trillion. So we have all these points that we would like to make, and really stress the need that we come forward and come up with a real, to implement the initiatives, the projects that we already made over the last decades.
His Excellency, allow me to pick another keyword that you mentioned in your first answer, the Tropical Forest Forever Fund. That is proposed as a new approach to forest finance, and of course also moving away from the traditional carbon offset mechanisms towards an investment-based model. So please give us, some concrete steps that Brazil is planning to guarantee transparency, accountability, but also a fair benefit sharing among the countries that are participating in that fund.
Well, I think this is a very innovative, creative initiative put forward by the Brazilian government to address the issue of the protection of the forest. We are shifting away from the traditional old donation structure for a sustainable financing mechanism to protect the forest. And not only Brazil is the biggest, but we have also Congo, we have Indonesia also that will benefit from this fund. We are not, the old traditional structure, this official development assistance that we used to have from the developed countries. This is what we are aiming at, is having a predictable and large-scale mobilization of private capital in favor of protect the forests. So the main objective is to protect the forest based on results. It's very clear. So the beneficiary country must first prove the conservation of its forest in order to receive the resources. So it's a different model as well. The distance itself from traditional donation methods. and meet the long-standing demand for a more linked disbursement to proven results. So it's really a very different model of protecting forests. And I've been talking to the German authorities about this for quite some time since I arrived here. I arrived 3 months ago, so I'm quite a newcomer. But anyway, this is a flagship project for us, and I've been receiving lots of support from the German authorities. Hopefully, Germany could give its support, and I think that will motivate many other countries to join this initiative.
But that brings me to the next question, because what is as a COP presidency, what is your expectation for Germany, but also, of course, for Europe? Because it is a very important day today.
Yeah, that's right. And first of all, we are very pleased of the attendance of Chancellor Merz to Belém. He'll be there on the 7th of November, well, this Friday. He'll be in Belém. And we're very pleased of his presence, and that represents strong commitment by Germany on this, on the sustainability agenda. And also, you will have a big delegation. Some of them were here this morning. And of course, and Germany actually has played a vital role in many different phases of this debate on environment. We had recently the Petersberg Climate Dialogue, which were held last March, and which carried particular weight on these discussions. Also, I have to stress the ambitious German national target of Federal Climate Protection Act. But in regard to TFFF, I think that there's a genuine, that's what I've been listening here, a genuine political will in favor of a strong engagement of Germany. So I think that, of course, this is a new initiative that technically it's quite complex. So they need to study them, but I'm sure since it's a very innovative and a very important initiative to protect the forests, I think that Germany will give its support. I'm sure about that.
Okay, we are starting with the questions from the audience, mixing up with some questions that are still in my head. When it comes to meaningful participation of the civil society, of indigenous communities, how do you plan to ensure a successful integration of local communities, everything that I just mentioned and everything that we've debated earlier, vulnerable groups, in Belém as a participation, given, of course, everything that comes along with the logistical challenges, etc., etc. How is the participation ensured?
Well, we consider this COP the most inclusive yet. And this is very important that we have, especially regarding traditional communities, we have lots of indigenous people in the Amazon. You know, the indigenous territories in Brazil represent 13% of the whole Brazilian territory. I think this is not very well put forward. And that's the first time that we have a specific item, in my understanding, for a specific pillar for social mobilization. We have 125 new intergovernmental, non-governmental organizations have accepted as permanent observers of the COP, effective from COP30 onwards. We have also launched the Participatory Brazil platform, through which a broad participatory process of civil society is being conducted. So civil society is giving prominence in the whole discussion that will take place in Belém. and in our delegation, we'll have representatives from the Brazilian civil society, which will have access to this famous blue zone. People familiar with this, with COP, know what I'm talking about. So we have representatives from the civil society, from the indigenous people, and subnational governments.
What about representatives of the business sector?
So
how can they find the way to Belém and to be included?
I've been talking to many representatives of the business community. I know they will have at least 5 or 6 German companies, big companies, present in Belém. We'll have, and it's quite, it's not a new thing, because in the other COPs I personally saw many representatives from business community present in these discussions, and which is very welcome that we have the possibilities of discussing, of interacting with representatives of the business community, because this is a integrated process. We have the civil society, we have the business community, you have the indigenous people, so it's in the interest, I think, of all participants to establish this very fruitful dialogue.
His Excellency, we need all hands on deck, and you just mentioned maybe we need more than 5 to 6 German businesses, which brings me to a question from the audience. Where do you see your potential as COP presidency for cooperation, of course, between Brazil connecting climate policy with the business sector?
Well, Brazil is always putting forward this element of integration, that we should listen to the demands of all actors involved. And the business community is, of course, is one of the main actors in this whole process. We are talking about economy as well, because not only we're talking sustainable development. I have to look at this expression and see the economic consequences of all of this process. So it is in the interest of our government to listen to them, and I think it's in their interest to participate in a very strong way of all discussions during the COP30.
Another question of the audience: how do you see the chances of cooperation between Europe/Germany and Brazil in the area, especially of green energy, and in particular of hydrogen?
Well, hydrogen, green hydrogen is, of course, it was still far from being an economic tool, and of course we've been discussing the use of green hydrogen in Brazil for quite some time. We're still in its initial phase, but I'm quite optimistic that in the coming years it will become a major source of renewable energy, especially in case of Brazil in the northeast region. We have, there is the consortium of the governors of the Northeast that are proposing that we speed up this process of having the green hydrogen as one of the major sources of energy in Brazil, and a possibly export to other countries like Germany. So it is in our agenda, definitely.
Beautiful. We continue with questions from the audience. So many more questions. Thank you for submitting all your questions. I will forward them. So, His Excellency, the forest facility is an important proposal. Is Brazil planning to enhance the safety for people who fight for forests, especially coming from indigenous communities?
Well, indigenous community, we are, the fact that this COP is being held in Belém do Pará, it's also a demonstration of respect for the indigenous people. And in our proposal, the TFFF, 20% of all the funds go to the indigenous people. So we are, they will be present in all sorts of forums during the COP30. we are, I think, as I mentioned to you, to be the most inclusive COP yet. And of course, especially in our case, indigenous people will be one of the main actors.
Yeah, another question from TFFF. So it's really a boiling topic here in the chat. What happens, His Excellency, to forest protection projects if the capital market does not yield the expected margins?
Well,
What happens?
You know, we have, this is, as I mentioned to a German colleague recently, this was not an overnight thought. This was very carefully drafted for a long time. It took a long time to put this into the paper, and we consider all the elements involved on this. It is we trust that this fund will be implemented fully. Of course, it is in its initial phase. We don't expect major announcements in Belém, even though Brazil, we already made this announcement. We made the pledge of $1 billion for the TFFF a couple of months ago during the GA in New York by President Lula. So it's a clear demonstration that we believe in the fund, and we think that more countries should be on board.
Okay, for the last question, we still need to talk about the dress code at COP.
Dress code?
Yes, because we just got a message, an email. It is smart casual for the COP. And that comes on with a question from the audience. Is there also a smart and a casual way for Brazil to ensure COP success? Isn't that a beautiful question?
Well, Brazilians are quite informal people. We
come in Havaianas.
Havaiana, they are Brazilians. Huh?
I know.
So I do recommend a more informal, more casual dress code.
But what does it mean for a COP success? Is that maybe the recipe?
Well, yeah, an informal discussion, that could be a recipe for the success of COP30. You're right.
Thank you. His Excellency.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Obrigada. Okay, so, das mit den Slido-Fragen funktioniert wunderbar. Ich habe noch
Okay, the thing about the Slido questions works great. I still have the word cloud that I announced earlier. I asked what would be one of the most important outcomes of the COP30, and I'm just, we're going to continue in German now. Please take out your phone and copy the QR code for our word cloud. What would be the most important outcome of COP30 for you in a single word? And it has to be a single word because we want to take the word cloud along to Belém. Now I would like to welcome the panelists, the participants for the next discussion. Dr. Bernhard Kott, Niels Annen and Vera Rodenhoff. Please come to the stage and then we'll have a look at the word cloud together. While the word cloud is still coming together, I would like to welcome Dr. Bernhard Kott, State Secretary in the Federal Foreign Office. Welcome to our political round, as it were. Then we have Niels Annen, State Secretary in the Federal Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation, and Dr. Vera Rodenhoff, Deputy Director General for International Climate Policy from the Federal Ministry for the Environment. That is the closing panel of our COP briefing. And here we want to bring together our expectations for the COP, possibly dissolve unclear points. And before we do that, I would like to take a look at the word cloud, the most important outcome of COP30 in a single word. Of course, that's a tricky question, asking people to put things into one word, but You are all familiar with word clouds. The larger the font of a term, the more often it's been mentioned. If it's very small font size, you might be the only person who put that term into the cloud. I can see fossil phase out, TFFF, ambition, climate justice. Commitment is increasing in size. I suggest that during the panel discussion we come back to this word cloud, and you're welcome to continue to submit your questions via Slido. Perhaps a first question to kick off this round. Mr. Koch, Mr. Annan, Ms. Rodenhoff, what would you have put into the cloud? Well, first of all, as a representative of the Federal Foreign Office, it's a pleasure to have 3 panelists on stage here, because I think it makes clear that climate policy is not only within the remit of the Ministry for the Environment or the Foreign Office, but also the Ministry for Cooperation and Development. I could list all the ministries of the federal government, but it's a particular pleasure that we are having this briefing here at the Federal Foreign Office. And coming back to your question, I think together is the most important term. And it's not only the word that characterizes German climate policy, but international climate policy, because it's a great task for all nations. And so I think together is an important term. Mr. Annan? Yes, good afternoon also from me, and I'm also very pleased to be in a panel with representatives from other ministries here. And I think that with everything that we are experiencing at the moment, we're seeing the withdrawal of some countries, we're seeing multilateralism under permanent attack, and our job is to show that multilateralism works, that it brings results in a complex environment. And I think that is what is most important. And we also have to create a positive atmosphere. It's not true that we haven't achieved anything in recent years, and we're now at COP30. So I think it's an important message to take along to this COP, this positive spirit. And a positive spirit that also shines through the terms that you have inserted into the cloud. I think that's a good starting point for the COP30 discussions. What would you have put in the cloud? Well, it's already all there. Ms. Rodenhoff, question to you with a view to our survey. Is there any term that you agree with in particular? What would you have put into the cloud? I would have struggled to find a single word, and if I had to settle on a single word, I would have chosen ambition. And if I could choose 2 words, I would have said together and ambitions. And one thing that is implicit here but missing from the cloud, maybe it's not 15 but 1.5, sticking to the 1.5 degree target of global warming, and adaptation, of course, that's an important issue. Allow me to start with you in our discussion. The Federal Ministry for the Environment is taking the lead in negotiations. What's the most important thing that Germany can do and wants to do? We're talking a lot about success when it comes to the COP. So what can Germany do, and what does Germany want to do to make COP30 a success? There are many elements. One important part is, what are we as Germany and we as the European Union taking to Belém? And that is an ambitious NDC, an ambitious EU NDC, the prime topic on the agenda of the European Environment Council that is currently meeting, and that is discussing the climate target for 2040, from which the NDC for the EU would be derived. So we should be bringing that to Belém. It should be aligned to 1.5 degrees. It should be in line with our long-term EU climate targets. And that's what we need in order to take other people on board once we're at the COP. If we don't succeed in doing that, we will have to deliver more in other areas. So it's important that we lead by good example. did you call the ministry or did you call the minister in Brussels to see whether there are any news? I did, in fact, but about half an hour ago I called, and there are currently talks going on about the 2040 targets, and talks have not yet moved to the NDC. So yeah, we're all anxiously waiting for your phone to ring. Mr. Annan, when we're talking about climate funding, we also have to look to the BMZ, because the lion's share comes from international cooperation, from your ministry. That is particularly important for our partners in the Global South, especially when we're talking about adaptation. So climate funding from the BMZ. How does Germany ensure its leading position in this area at the COP? Thank you. For many years, together with our partners, we've been making an important contribution to climate funding. And that has a direct impact on the overarching goals of our development cooperation, eradicating poverty, access to resources, etc. And we can see that the phenomena that we're dealing with, droughts, floods, etc., they are coming closer. And I think we have to underline that again. Everything that we're doing, every cent that we're spending, and we do want to make sure that every taxpayer euro is as efficient as possible. And that is why we're continuously improving the efficacy of our methods, using all the levers that we have, mobilizing private capital. But ultimately, this is a point where we proved in difficult times that we are there for our partners in the Global South, that we're reliable when it comes to climate funding, and when it comes to an event as important as the COP. And we are pleased to have Brazil hosting the COP, which focuses on the forest and is actually set inside the rainforest. This COP is an opportunity to raise awareness and to explain that if we don't overcome climate change, if we don't stop global warming, that the impact of global warming will also be felt here in Germany. And I think that we're already seeing that on a regular basis here. And so this partnership really has to be on eye level. It's not donations. It's not a contribution given from the big global north, but rather it is a joint effort of the global community. And after having contributed financially in recent years and decades, we now expect a joint effort from the global community. And so I think it is right that we go beyond the traditional donor and receiver relationships. Yes, there is a historical carbon footprint, and we have to face up to this responsibility. But many of our partner countries, many emerging countries, are major emitters now. And that is something that we also have to put on the agenda, and a responsibility that they also have to assume. That takes us to geopolitics in the context of climate action. And the climate there is as rough as it never has been before. So let's look to the Foreign Office again. What will be the role of the Federal Foreign Office in COP negotiations? The minister said earlier, talked about climate foreign policy. What role will that play at the COP? Well, the fact that we're having this briefing here already proves that we have a role to play and continue to play a role. And I think that is a good distribution of work that is taking place here. I said earlier that climate is not only a topic for the Environment Ministry, it's also an issue for defense policy, economic policy, a topic for our society. We all have to agree on what the environment is worth to us and what we are prepared to do. And this year, we are looking at climate policy from a point of view of foreign and security policy. As you know, until last year, we were in a leading role in the COP negotiation. The coalition agreement now means that the responsibility for these negotiations has gone back to the Ministry for the Environment. We would have liked to continue in that role because we think climate policy is interesting and exciting, and we also think it's an essential task It was an essential task for us within the federal government. And of course, we will continue to support the Ministry for the Environment in this leading role here in Berlin, in Belém, and also in the 222 German missions abroad. Because the connections that we have also result from the information that we collect from our German missions abroad, from China, from the US, from our European partner countries. So we continue to play an active role also with our colleagues in Belém who will be on the side panels on foreign and security policy. And of course, we are still happy to support wherever we can. From our point of view as a Federal Foreign Office, we're looking at the question of what this means for the international community. I attended the high-level week of the United Nations in New York in September, and in all bilateral conversations and on all panels, climate and security policy played an important role. Also issues of migration, climate policies in relation to conflicts, water conflicts, all of that played an important role, and we as the Federal Foreign Office still have a lot of scope for action.
Ganz heiße Frage im Chat.
And we're also going to discuss the details. And that's a hot topic in the questions as well. But what I heard is multilateralism playing a big role. And my question would be, what are the expectations of the Foreign Office to preserve multilateral and strengthen multilateralism that is faced with challenges? It is clear that the international order is under attack. There are various conflicts. I don't have to go into detail, but let me refer to the high-level week of the United Nations end of September. Despite all criticism voiced towards the United Nations and despite the watering down of structures, everyone was there. A lot of talks took place. We could have many bilateral meetings. In the end, this high-level week showed that multilateralism is alive. There are challenges, that's clear, but I believe that we will see the second big event in Brazil this year, where multilateralism can show its worth, and its worth and value lies in exchange, in networks that are created on the ground, talks at the margins, in meetings behind closed doors, and this is something that needs to be maintained. And this is a role of the Federal Foreign Office, not just for COP, but of course it's a task that we're faced with 365 days per year. And that brings me back from multilateralism to the core topic of forest. And let me look and turn to the BMZ, because the ambassador said that the protection of forests will play a pivotal role during this COP, especially when it comes thanks to the place where COP takes place in the middle of the Amazon. How can we lend a contribution to the COP's success, also when it comes to the protection of forests? I believe everyone understands and realizes without the protection of the Brazilian or the Latin American rainforest, the Congo Basin mentioned by the ambassador, also other countries, Indonesia, for instance, have great forest resources. And if we don't succeed in protecting this resource, we will not have a realistic chance to even reach our climate goals. And this is why we welcome that the Brazilian COP presidency places such great focus on this politically in preparation, but also we live in modern times, and images can shape emotions and policies, and I think it is well placed to host the COP in Berlin. We're grateful to our hosts that they do that despite the challenges. If you look at what the BMZ did in the last decades, then the partnerships with the forest nations, if you will, were important. Of course, the Amazon, which plays the biggest and strongest role in the German debate, politically, conceptually, but also financially, we were always committed in various instruments. We are involved in multilateral instruments, also via donors like the Inter-American Development Bank. But allow me to also mention the following, and Excellency, my apologies. Of course, the Amazon is in a focus, but we also need to look at the Congo Basin. We established partnerships in politically very complex situations. I believe it's important that we manage to also involve private donors and philanthropists, and we remain a reliable donor. And we support forest protection. And of course, we also support the participation in new and innovative instruments, the so-called TFFF instrument. I believe, yes, we need to do something against the destruction of forests, and we did that together with our partners in the past years. But to actually give countries an incentive, a financial incentive, when they preserve the forest with all the resources, I think it's an innovative idea, and I think this is why it's a very important contribution. And His Excellency, the Ambassador, did mention it on purpose. It was no accident that he mentioned it, or a coincidence. Mrs. Rodenhof, we don't want to look into a crystal ball, but please take us on board. The new target formulated by EU ministers of the environment would also be great for COP, right? I said it in by way of introduction. I'd like to add also with regards to multilateralism. The Paris Agreement is a wonderful example for multilateralism because it shows that multilateralism works. Without the Paris Agreement, we would be faced with more than 4 degrees of global warming today, depending on the implementation of NDCs, and also depending on what happens with the US NDC, we're between 2.4 and 3 degrees, so it delivered. And climate action as such, and we're grateful that we, in cooperation with the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the BMZ, cooperate. Climate action is a topic with which we can build bridges. So it is also a good topic for diplomats. Some other topics may be difficult, but you can always discuss climate action. We always share the same interest, although even if we may have differing interests and views on climate action, depending on our state of development. But I think in the end, everyone around this globe has an interest in being able to live on this planet and continue to live. And Germany, as a historic emitter, bears responsibility that, corresponding to our per capita figures, our innovative power, our economic clout, corresponding to our economic power, we must present an NDC, and that corresponds to the Paris agreements. We should have already done that. We're a bit lagging behind, but we need to present it, and it has to be in line with the 1.5-degree goal. It has to be more progressive and ambitious than our last NDC, and it has to be in alignment with our long-term goal of the European Union, carbon neutrality. And this leads us quickly to where we need to end up. In our view, we need to end up at 72.5% until 2035, and we want to reach that goal. Of course, we have other things in our suitcases, in our luggage. We are willing to share our fair burden in the field of climate financing. The new collective quantified goal, which we agreed upon in Baku, we want to do our part, not alone. Others also have to do their fair share to the amount possible, and we also need to mobilize private capital, the private sector. But it is important that we strengthen the confidence and trust in everyone, so that we stick to the core objectives: mitigation, adaptation, and financing, the core objectives of Paris, that we make progress in these fields. And the EU NDCs lends a contribution, but it's not the only contribution. It's a guideline for our economy, our business community. Climate action is also economic policy, energy policy, foreign policy. We need to be careful. Other countries are leading the way. We see this in China. E-mobility has a fundamental and significant share already, and we need to make sure that we don't fall behind when it comes to these innovative technologies. We can also use climate action, climate protection for the benefit of our economy, and also use the potential for social inclusion if we do it right. And I get back to this. Just transition is also something that needs to be considered. One question to you, but also the BMZ. What can Germany/the EU do so that just transition will make progress as well? Where are the stumbling blocks here? Where are blind spots? Well, for one, we need a space at COP where we can exchange views on just transition. What does it mean? I just elaborated on this. Just transition means that we won't leave parts of society behind, we won't abandon anyone, but that we still manage to stick to the 1.5 goal, and how we manage to achieve that, and how to exchange views on this. How do we tell our narrative, our story about our transformation in Germany, phasing out of coal-fired power plants? So we need to find a space, and we need to involve this in the work streams. Just transition also means, and we need to establish that, going towards 1.5 degrees. Principles would be good. The list grows longer and longer. Mr. Koch, let me begin with you. Just transition needs to be involved in negotiations. Which partnerships would help? Well, the policies we developed together in order to bring this just transition about was done and conceived in partnership. Germany lends a contribution. We do that in cooperation within the federal government, but we have a room full of experts, but the JETPs, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, bring different donors together. I think it's important, and we're also seeing that donors leave due to the withdrawal of the US, and this could be compensated by additional donors, donations by others, also the European Union. It's very important to say that. That factors takes into account that it's not a short-term but a long-term process. If we want to support the partners, and this is a topic that is mentioned here as well, phasing out of fossil fuels, when we want to support developing nations, then we have to say from own experience, it will not work without taking the people on the ground on board with the political structures. We need to work with policymakers. We offer support. There are the same fears as we had in Germany in the traditional coal mining regions. Just think of the subsidies we paid with all it cost in terms of political effort. And when you then look at the dimensions in other countries with, in parts, a lower level of prosperity, other structures of government, then we're faced with a gigantic task. But on the other hand, it's also a tremendous opportunity to attract investments. It's an opportunity for German businesses. And with our financing instruments that we have at the BMZ, we have the opportunity to go where there are where there is need when it comes to infrastructure and other areas. It's not easy, but it's a start. I think we managed and overcame the first big stress test due to the withdrawal of a bid partner, and I think we need to use this COP to talk about the steps ahead. Mr. Koch, I will now move on to another debate, climate, the nexus between climate and security. Mr. Wadefull mentioned it, you mentioned it, especially when it comes to questions pertaining to distribution, conflicts surrounding resources. Just think of the nexus between climate and security. It's not on top of the agenda of the Brazilian presidency, but maybe you could give us some impetus and your assessment and talk about not just about the partnerships, but also how can we make progress in the field of climate and security. Allow me to make a comment on the discussion we just had. We take a holistic approach on this topic. I haven't heard the buzzword of competitiveness, and I'd like to mention it here. Of course, transformation needs to be embedded in our economic assessment, and we need to take the population on board so that we have the support of the people in Germany. Yes, security is not on the very top of the agenda, but still, of course, everyone has that in mind. Yesterday, I attended the DINA Energy Transition Conference, and the headline was Climate, Energy Transition and Security. Tonight, I will another event where we will hear a report on climate action, the role, the nexus between climate and security and foreign policy plays. I think this nexus is an underlying current and to be found in all topics that we're negotiating, especially when looking at the conflicts in many regions in the world. You encounter the very same topics. How can we create a link between foreign and security policy and climate action? I'm not going to talk about some dams or migration due to a lack of rain or too much rain, etc. In the international context, it's now a consensus and we need a solution. Thank you very much. I will take your questions on board. We have many questions. Is Germany going to keep its promise to provide, continue to provide the sums for the global south when it comes to climate support? Is Germany going to spend 16 billion per annum in support of climate measures? Last year, we spent more than 6.11 billion in budget support, and if you look at it, and if you look at what we mobilized in total, we moved beyond 11 billion, and I think despite budgetary constraints, we are going to continue to spend money. And another topic I mentioned, Mr. Koch, we talk about the new distribution of responsibilities. How does the cooperation work after realigning things? Well, it works well. What else should I say? When it comes to distributing the portfolio, with our colleague Flassbart, we worked well together. There was no dispute, or we repatriated this portfolio to the Federal Ministry of the Environment. I don't know whether you had to deal with German bureaucracy in that way. It's not all that easy, but we didn't encounter any problem. We agreed on finances, the topics, and the staff, and all that. And what remains here at the Foreign Ministry sends out a signal that we will continue to focus on climate foreign policy, and security policy, and this is a topic that we continue to focus on, not just here at the ministry, but also at the embassies abroad. Now, the BMZ, for us, things didn't change much, but jokes aside, we didn't have the lead role for the negotiations, so the foreign ministry was playing the lead, and now it's back at the Ministry for the Environment. And with both ministries, we successfully cooperated successfully with both. And I'm convinced that the topic of climate financing remains a pivotal issue. The colleague mentioned the climate goals, and we presented them proudly a couple of days ago. But the public reaction was negative, pretty much, because criticism was voiced by people that every euro that goes into international cooperation is wasted money. But now, since I am in a room with many people who focus on our common goal, I don't want to complain, it's not my job, but sometimes we would hope that such public debates would be also influenced by other voices, but these are the experience that we have. Yes, thank you. But the question you asked about cooperation between the ministries, cooperation is good. We travel there together, and we coordinate ourselves, and we at the BMZ, we are happy about the Chancellor's trip to Berlin because he speaks on behalf of everyone. And I believe this will, be met with attention here in Germany. And we need that kind of attention. Mrs. Rodenhoff, I came to the Federal Ministry for the Environment on Monday. Before, I was a different ministry, and we cooperated closely with the various ministries. I talk to the same colleagues, and we will continue to cooperate well. We know each other well. It's all based on trust, but we also have support from our bosses. And of course, we're happy that the Chancellor travels to Berlin. Another question, we talked a lot about our forests, but what about maritime protection? Because the protection of the oceans is also protection of the climate. Yes, this actually it's in my portfolio. I am responsible for that. The ocean plays a big role when it comes to climate action, also when it comes to containing, because a lot of CO2 is captured and stored in the ocean, but the opportunities are finite, and this is not what the oceans serve to do. It's important that it's not polluted, but the oceans and the mangrove forests play overall, the whole ecosystem plays a very, very big role when it comes to climate protection and needs to be protected against climate change with more than 1.5 degrees. And this, we've already reached that stage last year. The corals are dying because they're not as quickly when in adapting to global warming, and it's difficult to catch up. And then, of course, the ecosystem services will die. There are fishes who leave their eggs there. The whole chain up to the humans, all of this is intertwined and interdependent. This brings me to the topic of forest, and I look at you from the BMZ. Is Germany going to participate in the TFFF, and is this financing being done in addition to current funding already?
I tried to get round answering that question in the earlier round. We are very intensely reviewing our participation, and we are in close coordination with all the parties that we have to talk to in this regard, and that is all I can say at this point. What progress can we expect in the field of climate change adaptation, and what is necessary in order to progress internationally in this field from the German point of view? Ms. Rodenhoff is taking the mic. I like that. Ms. Rodenhoff. Well, adaptation to climate change, we need indicators that allow us to measure our progress in adaptation to climate change, also with regard to the funding provided for it. And the first step is always mitigating the impact of climate change, because without mitigation we would need to adapt even more, but we also need adaptation measures. And we have to make sure that funding is made available for that as well. But again, we are making our fair contribution, so do others. And we want to move forward together with others in order to build trust. Perhaps I can add to this, mitigation is always in the focus of the debate. We have a clear goal. But at the same time, we also know that certain elements of the man-made climate change will no longer be able to be stopped. They are having an impact on a daily basis, also on us, although we are still in a privileged area. Many of our partner countries in the global south are not in such privileged areas, and so in recent years, we made a lot of efforts to enhance the funding available for climate change adaptation. We're using our bilateral structures in order to not only discuss with our partners, but also to develop strategies together. And my impression is that this is a topic that would need more attention. And at the COP, we're going to try and bring this on the agenda to raise more awareness and to establish new funding instruments. Coming back to what Mr. Koch said earlier, opportunities for German industry, that is something that we are committed to do as the federal government. We look very closely at the different funding instruments, and I think it is very important to continue this debate. My minister started the debate with an important dialogue, and I think it is important to continue the debate with German companies because there are great opportunities included in this if we activate all the funding mechanisms that are possible. But that requires commitment from all parties involved. And it is also an opportunity for very specific services and very specialized know-how that we have in Germany and that we can continue to develop further. Mr. Koch, another question for the Federal Foreign Office. We have to talk about China. What do you think will be the role played by China at the COP? And who are the major defenders of the age of fossil fuels? Well, China will have to play a role that is commensurate with its important economic power. It is the second economic power in the world. And of course, they are also an important emitter, but they are also a supporter of climate action. In 2025, they have installed as much renewable energy as we already have in Germany, but at the same time, they're still building coal-fired power plants. So I think we must support the new way that China is embarking on, but we also have to make clear that their increasing economic and political power comes with responsibility, and that this responsibility is one for the entire world. When it comes to China, we always have to be careful with regard to the rules that they are prepared to accept, and that will require some in-depth discussion. Of course, we must not play by Chinese rules, but we must have a close dialogue with Beijing, and I think we all agree on that. In terms of foreign policy, are the climate targets realistically achievable without the US and Silicon Valley? I don't know. That's for experts to decide. But from a foreign policy and security policy point of view, I can only say that we must maintain close contact with the Americans. We must keep them in the system as far as possible. They have an important responsibility that goes both ways. They are still a value partner for us. And from a point of security policy, I can only say that despite all the criticisms that we might have when it comes to political decisions made by the US administration, we Europeans will not be able to achieve our targets without the Americans. I agree with that, but I would like to underline that there are important American companies who took strategic corporate decisions based on an analysis that I think we can share when it comes to climate change. That refers to renewable energies, new technologies, storage technologies. And of course, Mr. Koch said it already, as a federal government, we have to talk to the US administration, but we must not forget that the American society is organized on a federal level. They have federal states with an economic power that is comparable to major European states, and these federal states have ambitious climate targets. Our observation is that the federal states themselves, to a certain extent, have their own climate foreign policy. And the more Washington is looking away from climate policy, the stronger the climate agenda becomes in individual federal states. And I think that is something that we must not forget when analyzing the overall situation in the US. And I think that's a reason for optimism. Another question to Ms. Rodenhoff. How can we achieve the German and European climate targets without phasing out of internal combustion engines and with a climate action program that is still outstanding? Well, without a phase out of internal combustion engines, it will be difficult. But I also don't think that we will not have the phase out ultimately. There will be a solution. The same is true when it comes to buildings. We are currently reviewing the mechanisms that could work in this area. Of course, in Germany, there are also sectors that are lagging behind, and we are tackling them together with other ministries. And yes, we do want to achieve our climate targets. We are optimistic that we will achieve the climate targets, but we can't do so alone. We must take on board the other ministries, transport, building and housing. It is possible, there are solutions, but we have to have the courage to implement the solutions that we already know about. Climate and health are another topic at the COP30, the Health Action Plan, better integration of climate action and health protection in times of global pandemics. A question for the Environment Ministry, the BMZ, and also the foreign policy point of view. For example, the Leaders Summit that will take place on 6th and 7th November, a declaration will be made regarding hunger and health and society. That is a leader declaration. Of course, climate action is essential to health. We're not only talking about greenhouse gas emissions and their reduction, which cause the death of millions of people every year. There are also heat-related deaths, a topic that is not sufficiently represented in public opinion, because normally we could say what is good for people is good for the planet. So there is more we could do when it comes to mobility, when it comes to food and diets. And that is not an issue where we have to use bans and prohibitions, but rather a topic where we can talk about solutions that already exist. For example, cycling wherever possible. And that's not only good for personal health, it is also good for the health of the planet. But perhaps the BMZ has more to say about that. Well, we are grateful that the Brazilian COP presidency also focuses on health as an issue. A couple of weeks ago in Berlin, we had the annual World Health Summit, where I had the opportunity to speak to my Brazilian colleague about this issue. And I think all in all, also in the German debate, we have to emphasize again that if we don't work on these issues together internationally, and if we don't agree on joint targets, then there will be very specific impacts. There's a connection between human health and animal health. That's something we learned from the pandemic. We need investments into our basic health systems, especially in the least developed countries, and they need our support for that. We don't have to be pessimistic, but we have to acknowledge the best available science and the probability that we will see another pandemic during our lifetime is fairly high. We have almost shifted our focus away from this risk, but it is a job of politicians to make sure that pandemic infrastructure is maintained, that we can reach people in remote areas. These are lessons that we learned, and the One Health approach is still very important. We also have diseases, conditions in Germany and in Europe that only used to occur in tropical regions, so it can't be in our interest for this trend to continue. So this is an area where we have always been very active. Research into neglected tropical diseases. That may sound like a niche subject, but it's important. And if we get this right, then we can build a structure that makes it attractive for major pharmaceutical companies to become more involved with these conditions. They are already doing so, but they don't have a strong business case at the moment. And I think bringing these things together, that is where the initiative from Brazil has an important role to play. Another question from the audience to the Federal Foreign Office. What will be the role of the Federal Foreign Office in future when it comes to funding and involvement in the International Climate Initiative? And is the Federal Foreign Office planning to have a strategic debate about the role of Germany? Well, when it comes to funding, let me think. I don't think we haven't got any. We have funding from the International Climate Initiative to fund smaller projects, but we are handing this over to the Environment Ministry. We've lost our influence in that area, and all we can do is make a token contribution by focusing the issues, but we are now reduced to that. A brief look to our colleague from the Environment Ministry. Is it true that the funds disbursed by the International Climate Initiative are now with the Environment Ministry? That is true. The Environment Ministry has the lead for the International Climate Initiative. We're working in this together with the Foreign Office, which also has a certain amount of funding available in order to support projects in cooperation with us. Now to climate science and the priority of climate science. Are there any plans to drive this forward in strategic debates, strategic dialogues? Not to my knowledge. I'm not aware of any initiative in this area at the moment. And last question, with a view to German negotiations and the role of Germany in the negotiations on the work program. Just transition is an important buzzword in the chat. What will be Germany's position in the negotiations on the work program for just transition to drive forward a socially just climate action program? Well, I tried to sketch this out. The negotiations on just transition are quite a complex topic, and our core goal is to show that ambitious climate action and the transformation in order to comply with 1.5 degrees has to go together with just social change, inclusion, and the restructuring of the economy, the steel industry, for example, towards an industry that uses hydrogen and that maintains the workforce in the sector, that retrains people to make sure that they can work in renewable sectors, in energy efficiency sectors. All of this has to be thought together, and this understanding of just transition, that has to be a shared understanding with other states, with other nations. That is what we're trying to achieve in the negotiations at the COP. And we want to open up a space in the so-called work streams in the Just Transition Work Program or in the Mitigation Work Program. We want to create space in these negotiations to bring in just transition issues. And if it goes really well, then all nations will agree on one vision for that. That is a great closing statement. We are all sitting here on our packed cases to go to Belém. Thank you to all my panelists. And thank you to you for asking your questions, for taking part in this discussion. 2 details before you leave. Please return your translation devices. And I would like to thank the team behind the scenes, because making a briefing like this possible just before the COP is worth a round of applause on its own. And climate foreign policy is an ongoing topic. COP30 starting next week. All hands are needed on deck. I wish all of us the best of success. Make sure you go into the COP well rested. And until we meet again, all the best. Thank you.